Hello, and today we are going to be introducing an idea or a series for mental exercise. This has been something that I've wanted to introduce for a while, but I've had a hard time coming up with the best way to sort of introduce it because I think that there's like a lot of background conversations and nuance. And so what I've decided is we should just go and look at a superficial level at the idea of mental exercise, the different kinds of mental exercise, as well as kind of a brief overview of the background conversations I think are important for legitimizing mental exercise as an activity, because on first at first blush, it might look like mental exercise as an activity is kind of just this frivolous, like do nothing, like sort of read your affirmations to yourself, and it's like not effective and like this sort of thing. And I think that the idea of mental exercise gets a bit of a bad rap. It's sort of coming up in terms of like popular culture, with like meditation being called the new coffee and like these sorts of things. But let's get into it. So first things first, the primary motivation for doing mental exercise is to increase your agency or your ability to just engage in the actions that are useful or moving towards your values. And this is kind of the baseline motivation that we will be coming back to kind of repeatedly. Secondly, what is mental exercise? And so I like to define it as structured mental introspection, and it is by necessity something that is proactive. If you look, we're kind of going to work through the top left corner of this mind map. And so when I say that it's proactive, is you are trying to engage in activity that is going to give you some extra capacity later on down the road. It's not like a strategy you use in real time for getting more out of yourself, but something you do before you're going to need it. And so I think that the best metaphor for this is like a sort of fitness or attentional fitness, if you will. And a story that's particularly popular in strength training is the legend of Milo of Croton. He was a wrestler like back in like 600 BC or something, and was a wrestler. There's like a lot of mythologizing that goes on, but the legend states that what he did is he took a calf, a bull calf, and he carried it up a hill. And he carried it up a hill every day, and every day it got a little bit heavier, and Milo got a little bit stronger, and so he was able to carry a heavier and heavier bull. Obviously, if a man just started off with a full-size bull, he would never be able to carry it up a hill. Spoilers, Milo couldn't carry a full-size bull up a hill either. But the idea is by progressively overloading and starting small, you can make progress. Another way to think of this is, you would never be able to just like, never go to the gym and just like deadlift 500 pounds, or at least most people couldn't. But if just about any male, if they want to, can go to the gym consistently and be able to deadlift 500 pounds because they work at it consistently. And I can kind of appreciate how someone might be like, okay, well, that's your physical body. Your brain's not like that, except your brain is like that. Your brain is capable of what's known as neuroplasticity. So your brain is actually capable of rewiring itself based on the sorts of stimulus that you receive. We'll jump into that in a second. But another thing that I think is a good way for like processing, well, what is mental exercise, or like what's the goal or what's going on, is there's this Buddhist principle that you want to you want to respond to situations in your life rather than just react to them, which involves like creating this space in which you get stimulated, and then you make a decision about what you're going to do, and then you respond. Okay. I think this is useful for thinking through, but it like doesn't fully explain. Okay, some of the background discussions. Or let's give an example of a mental exercise, just very briefly. An example is sentence completion. As far as I know, this was created by Nathaniel Branden, who is a psychologist. He's also somewhat known for having an affair with Ayn Rand, but that's another thing. And so the way it works is you have the sentence stem, and you complete the sentence stem, and by doing this, you're doing a few things. Most notably, you're priming yourself, and you're also kind of picking your own brain. So your sentence stem might be something like, if I were to bring 5% more attention to my relationships today, then I would ... and you complete these as fast as possible. You make 5 or so completions, and you just see what your like brain spits out. And so this would be the idea behind this is it's going to be you're brainstorming and you're trying to figure out what you might do or what actions you might behave, and you're also priming yourself and rehearsing. You're priming yourself because you're thinking about what you value, in this case your relationships, and you're rehearsing because you're preparing yourself down the line to behave as if you were spending 5% more attention on this thing. Okay. So some of the background conversations that I think are particularly relevant to mental exercise. The first is an idea from philosophy. We're not going to get too into it, but it's this idea of materialism, and it's this materialist conception of free will, which basically says, there's no free will. Everything that you do ever is not really a choice. Instead, what it is a product of conditioning. And it is a product of biology. And everything is reducible to this. Okay. Generally speaking, this is a rather popular view in philosophy. And what such a view does is it denies the notion of one's own agency. And there's kind of a rich conversation about this. But notably, as far as mental exercise goes, the notable portion of materialism we care about is that you don't really control what thoughts enter your brain. And so day to day, like, you don't, whatever next thought comes into your brain is not something that you consciously decided to enter your awareness before it entered your awareness. And this thing is kind of key, because if you're not in control of what enters your awareness, to some degree, this is actually going to mean you're not in control of what choices enter your awareness. And so let's say you do have free will and you can choose between choices that enter your awareness. But if you don't control what enters your awareness, how are you going to indeed make a choice? And so kind of a good example of how lack of control of what enters our awareness and how it can control our agency kind of plays in, or like an example of what I mean is in the case of Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. If you have Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, you have a problem of something entering your attention that you don't want to, your obsession, and it will continue to ratchet up and ratchet up and ratchet up and ratchet up your anxiety and your attention just over and over and over again until you engage in your compulsion, at which point it will go away. Okay? So this is very obvious example of an instance where you are not controlling what's entering your attention. It's entering your attention, and it is affecting you in a profound way that affects your agency, because you don't really want to engage in your compulsion, but because the way stuff's entering your attention, it's like sort of forcing you. I would argue it is forcing you, but there's some wiggle room there. Okay, so what do we do? Cognitive behavioral therapy is actually a method of treating OCD that's rather effective. And what it involves is asking yourself a set of specific questions regarding your obsession, and in response to your obsession, doing it ahead of time, and then it will help you through it. So notice, this is structured mental introspection. This is an example of, in psychology, how there is evidence to support structured mental introspection helping things. And so the intervention's effective, and not only is it effective, it has been shown to create physical changes in the brain, aka neuroplasticity, which we'll discuss a little bit more in a moment. But I think that the OCD is a really good example because it shows specifically the mechanism of how stuff enters our attention and affects our agency. And because there's a therapeutic intervention, in this case, the name is not entering my attention, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because there's a therapeutic intervention, right, that allows you to produce a better result. I forgot where I was going with this. That's not ideal. There's a therapeutic intervention that allows you to get the type of result you want and change the way in which the thoughts are coming into your brain. And so when people have a good result in terms of treating OCD, you're either decreasing the instances in which your obsession enters your awareness, or the intensity at which it enters your awareness, so that it's easier to not engage in the compulsion. I would describe this as a sort of attentional fitness. This is one version of attentional fitness, where you're not getting something to enter your awareness, or you're combating something and trying to get it to not enter your awareness. The second way you can think of attentional fitness, insofar as we're talking about stuff entering your attention, is making stuff you want to enter your attention enter your attention. An example of this would be implementation intentions, which is a form of rehearsal. It's mainly rehearsal. And so the idea is you have a sentence structure of, if this happens, then I will do this. And you do this ahead of time, and it's actually been shown to be quite effective at weight loss management, where you say to yourself, if I am sitting down at the table, then I will drink a glass of water before I start eating. And so this is, what it does is it greatly increases your chances of, first of all, just engaging in the behavior, but you could also strategically choose behaviors that you want to trigger an implementation intention for, in this case, drinking water, which makes it easier to eat less once you've already drunk water. So you can be strategic about it. It's not just, if I'm sitting down at the table, I will eat an amount that is consistent with my values, or something like this. So there's kind of multiple ways. And then a third way of thinking about it is creating meditation, for example, creates just a general attentional fitness. And they've done studies. I'll probably talk about these later in more detail. But meditation physically changes your brain. Meditators have different brains in terms of their ability to refrain from being so reactive to their environment. And so just think of stuff entering your attention and you just immediately responding to it. Instead, they create a sort of space and they respond rather than react. So you can create a delay between stimulus. It gives you more control. If you can create a delay between stimulus and response, you can create a bit more control in terms of what you're able to do. And that control is agency, which, coming back full circle, is the goal of the mental exercises, right? You're not doing them because they're fun, although some of them might be fun. You're doing them because you're looking for a certain type of result. Okay. And I think an important part to emphasize in all of this is mental exercises are meant to be done proactively, right? When the obsession is entering your head, you cannot just will the obsession away. A classic example of this is when people are don't think of the pink gorilla. It just kind of forces a pink gorilla into your head. And so if you want to think of the pink gorilla less, you actually need to be proactive in your approach. And also, if you want to think of something and you are not currently thinking of it, right? There's not a way for you to summon it into your mind because you're currently not aware of it. And so if you want to think about something more often, as in the case of implementation intentions, for example, triggering the drinking water, if you want to think of something more often, you need to proactively set aside time in order to program that sort of thing in your head and try and create changes that are not just at the mental level, but also the physical level, which is where we're going to talk about neuroplasticity. So your brain can rewire itself and is actually quite flexible in this regard. There's a lot of studies, and most of the studies are done on animals, and a lot of them are not very nice. I think in one, they sewed chimps' fingers together, and then they looked at the portions, how their brain partitioned, finger mobility and that sort of thing. And they found that when you sew the fingers together, the parts of the brain will get reassigned to other sorts of activities. Another notable one is they had cats and they sewed the cat's eyes shut. And what happened is that with the cat's eyes sewed shut, the portion of their brains that was normally committed to visual activity and like deciphering that sort of stuff was severely inhibited, and it was instead assigned to other stuff like tactile sensation, these sorts of things. What they actually found with the cat one, and this is particularly interesting and it's important for like the conversation on like agency and attention and this sort of thing, is that they did another study where they had a cat and they were rehabilitating the cats that had been, like, they had their eyes sewn shut for the first, I forget how many weeks or whatever of their lives, and they were saying, well, can they learn now? And they had these cats in bonded pairs, okay? And one of the pairs would be like kind of in a bit of a wagon, and the other would be the one dragging the wagon. So they had all of the control and all of the agency. And what they found was, and they opened both of their eyes, but the one that was in the wagon had no control over where they went, and the one that was dragging the wagon had control. And what they found was the one who was dragging the wagon around and had control, their brains actually developed this area of the brain associated with visual stimulus, and the other cat did not. So it was not just visual stimulus, but the sensation of having agency. And so this is really powerful because this means that there's like a two-way interaction between the feeling of agency and physiological development in the brain, like shaping. And this two-way interaction, for some philosophers, is kind of an essential aspect of making an argument that we have free will, but that this free will is at a very particular site. And the site at which they argue that you have free will is you can choose to continue attending to something. And this is a bit of like kind of an abstract tangential sort of argument, but if you are going to make the absolute minimalist claim in regards to where free will exists, since you can't really control what enters your attention, and whatever enters your attention affects what you're able to do, there's this thing in psychology called Affordances, where you interpret reality in terms of like what you can do with it. Well, if you don't interpret objects of reality as something you can interact with, then you actually become like incapable of interacting with them. And this is getting like kind of in the weeds a bit, but if you don't really control what enters your brain or how it enters your brain, where do you have control? And I've seen the argument, I think this is kind of a reasonable argument, that the point at which you have control is once something enters your attention, you can choose to continue attending to it. And then from here, if that's all you really have control of, well, how can you gain other control? And the answer is through structured mental introspection, you can build out your own agency by proactively using the limited control you have, the ability to engage in structured mental introspection, to turn it into other things, to make yourself more aware of how you can act within the world, and that increased awareness of how you can act in the world informing how you actually act in the world. So the example being like the implementation intentions. If every morning you read a piece of paper, structured mental introspection, that says, if I am sitting down to have a meal, then I will drink water, it's going to enter your attention when you sit down to drink a meal, whether or not you want to drink water. And if it didn't enter your attention, you're maybe not doing the drinking of the water. But now that it enters your attention, now you have a choice because it's in your attention now. And it's that proactive step that made that choice. Okay. I hope I'm explaining this pretty well because I'm trying to very quickly cover a lot of ground because I don't want to do an exhaustive, huge video. Okay. So this is kind of the idea behind mental exercise, how it works, some background discussions, and then let's jump into talking about, in my mind, there are 5 types of mental exercises, and a lot of mental exercises are actually going to slot into multiple categories. These are in the upper right-hand corner of this video, and this is kind of just how I like to sort them myself, and they are brainstorming, priming, fitness, embodiment/environment, and rehearsal. So let's start off with probably the most basic one, which is fitness. In my mind, there's kind of only like a couple mental exercises that fit into here. And what you are doing is you're just trying to get better control of your own attention And that's it. You're not trying to increase any sort of specific action or realize any values. You are just trying to gain control of your attention and your ability to attend to that which you want to attend to. And I like to think of it as fitness because I think that the greater you increase this, the easier it is to engage in other mental exercises. And I think the most prototypical exercise for this is meditation. If you increase your ability to sit with your own thoughts and not respond to the thoughts and not react to the thoughts, but instead just watch the thoughts, which is largely what meditation is. It is the observation of thoughts without letting those thoughts embody you. It's kind of a rough explanation. But as you increase this power, you gain the ability to evaluate better, in my estimation, in real time, which is you do this proactively so that you can do it in real time, what effects your thoughts are having, or if your thoughts that you're having are consistent with your values, by having that extra space of detachment where you can respond rather than react. Okay. The second mental exercise let's cover, let's just go down the list, is brainstorming. So brainstorming is when you are doing anything to elicit certain information from yourself that you are maybe not always privy to. And so just how you can't choose what enters your attention, brainstorming is structuring your introspection, looking for particular things or general things from like your own subconscious, however you really want to process that, and sometimes through different lenses. So an example is, I think the most basic one is just asking yourself 100 questions. Just sitting down for an hour and saying, I'm going to ask questions, completely uninhibited, not attempt to answer the questions, just ask questions. And this mental exercise, I really like it a lot. Often the first 40 are throwaways, and then you start getting into the interesting stuff, 50 to 80, and then it kind of tapers off. That's been my experience. I think it's actually probably a timing thing where it just takes maybe 20 minutes to get into a certain sort of rhythm where you are engaging in more curious activity rather than just going through the motions of the exercise. And then eventually there's some level of fatigue, which might have some sort of correspondence with attentional fitness. I don't really know. My sample sizes on these sorts of things are small. Okay. Another example so that's just basic general brainstorming. Another example of brainstorming that's more stylized is there's a book called, let's see, I can't remember the book. It's 4 Archetypes for Masculinity, something like this. And one of the exercises that is in the book is you have a conversation with yourself. So one person is occupying you yourself, and the other is occupying an archetype of masculinity. I think it's king, magician, warrior, something. It's a model of masculinity. It's okay. But the exercise is very interesting because you're having a dialogue both from your perspective of you as yourself, this hand, and the archetype itself. So you're having a conversation with the warrior archetype, and you are doing it to elicit information from yourself from the perspective of, if I were the prototypical optimized warrior, what would I tell myself about what I need to do, and this sort of thing. And you can adapt this sort of mental exercise to be if I'm having a conversation with one of my heroes, if I were to have a conversation with Martin Luther King, what would I be saying, or something like this. There's a lot of adaptations, but the idea is you're trying to elicit certain types of information from yourself. It can be stylized, it can be general, there's a lot of flexibility, but you're going through a structured process by which you're trying to elicit certain sort of things in order to better understand what you think about stuff, or where you're going, or the proper way to do something. I'll not belabor it with more examples. I think that's kind of a point. The third is priming, and kind of most mental exercise is actually going to rely on this. There's this famous study where people were forced to solve enneagrams, which is scrambled words. They're supposed to unscramble them. And they were 4 words relating to being elderly and that sort of stuff, and decrepit. And what they found was, when they tested them after they got out is like they walked slower down the hallway. And they had no idea they were being tested for how fast they walked down the hallway. But when you had the elderly associated word group, you walked slower down the hallway than when you had a different set of anagrams, the control group. And so what this seems to indicate is that when you are exposed to something, even if you're not aware of it, you will tend to occupy it and behave in a way that is consistent with it. And so this raises a lot of interesting sort of things, like, for example, advertisement is really effective, and no one ever thinks it's effective, and they certainly don't think it works on them. And the thing is it doesn't work like as a form of mind control, but just exposing you to something makes it more likely you're going to consume it even later down the road. And this is what studies show, and that's why there's so much money in advertisement. If just exposing you to elderly words makes you behave in a more elderly way, then, like, what other things can happen? And so, okay, I think the most basic or best representation of priming might be affirmations, which is like kind of the prototypical thing when people think about when they think about mental exercise. Like, I'm a winner, I'm a self-confident, attractive male, like this sort of stuff, saying in front of the mirror. And okay, I think that's a bit of a caricature of the thing. You do want to phrase it in the present tense, generally first person, but like a better example is, I attend to my values throughout the day. When I am faced with a decision, I ask myself, what was the decision that's most consistent with my values? Like, that's an example of two different affirmations. I don't even like using the word affirmations. I prefer goals or signposts. But the idea is you are exposing yourself to certain ideas so that later down the road, or even in a more immediate sense, you're going to behave in a way that's more consistent with those ideas. I think actually the best example of priming is a mental exercise that I made where you just have a sheet of 30 empowering states. And you just, for 1 minute, you look at the empowering state and you think about it, and you just roll through the list. What I usually do is like 30 seconds a characteristic, and I think I have like 60 on it, and I just do it for 5 minutes, so I get through 10. And the whole idea is it's just this brief pattern interrupt where now I'm not getting all this chaos like from around, but instead something that I have previously decided are types of things I want to behave in accordance with. And so again, it's creating this structured mental introspection of a particular kind because I want to experience the empowering states and not just random states. Okay. Also, just it's the briefest intervention, I think, as far as mental exercises go with that particular exercise. But a lot of exercises are just going to be, priming. Like I talked about implementation intentions earlier. If I'm going to drink, if I am sitting down to eat a meal, then I'm going to drink a glass of water, is a form of priming because it's also just immediately following. You're going to be thinking about being more diet conscious and this sort of stuff, but it's also like working into your identity. And there's like multiple layers of what's going on. It's not just about the drinking the water in front of the meal, because you also have the fact that, generally speaking, you try and avoid cognitive dissonance. And so if you're doing the mental exercise to try and make it better to lose weight, you're actually going to be organizing the rest of your life around that sort of thing. And by doing it every day, you're priming yourself at the start of the day when you do it. Okay. The fourth one, because we're skipping over fitness because we started with it, is embodiment with environment. And this one's a bit of a cop-out. There is an interesting book called Thinfluence, which talks about how your environment can influence how easy it is for you to become overweight or not overweight. And so, well, this sounds a bit vague, but like, for starters, if you have overweight friends, you're more likely to be overweight. If your drive home is past fast food, you're more likely to be overweight. If there are fewer health food stores in your area, you're more likely to be overweight. And it's this aggregation of like all these environmental factors that affect like what you're able to do, or like it affects outcomes in the aggregate. Because it's not a guarantee you become overweight, right? But statistically speaking, in the aggregate, it makes it more likely for you to become overweight. And so what this means is that, and this is focusing on environment, not embodiment, is that you want to try and, if you can, set yourself up with an environment that is going to prime you in a way that is conducive to your values, or is going to make it so stuff that is entering your attention and is more likely to be consistent with your values. So this includes like who you hang out with, like what you do for fun, like where you're around, like all these sorts of things. Just the knowledge that these are going to affect your mental states and what options you consider available and these sorts of things. That's an environmental consideration. Again, it's a little bit of a cop-out because this is not a structured mental introspection itself, but it is an awareness to how our mental situation is like structured and works, and how our environment is going to affect our mental states, and so proactively deciding what types of environments we want to be in so that we eventually down the line get the types of states we want, the mental states we want, so we get the types of options we want to perceive as being available to us, etc., etc. Okay, the second one is embodiment. If you stand up tall and with confident posture, there's studies that show that you are a tougher negotiator. And if you get better sleep, you're going to think better. And if you drink more water and are well hydrated, you think better. If you, etc., etc. And these are, how should I put this? These are things, these physiological concerns, we tend to underappreciate because they don't really inform very much the story we tell ourselves about our life. And so it's important to just bring extra attention to them. Okay. The next and final category, semi-final category for types and mechanisms is rehearsal. A lot of mental exercises will rehearse specific situations so that you can, when you get there, engage in the activity you want to do. Implementation intentions, which I discussed earlier, is probably the best example. But if you were to combine implementation intentions with, let's say, embodiment, you could say, if it is bedtime, then I take the steps to go to bed. If I hear my alarm in the morning, then I get up and I turn off the alarm and I start my day. This would be an example of a set of implementation intentions where you are working on your embodiment, that is, having a regular sleep schedule, so that you will get a better physiology, so that the stuff that's entering your attention will tend to be more productive. Like, one of the problems with depression specifically is that it warps the lens through which you perceive reality to just be more negative. And an example of why sleep is good is it warps your perception of reality to be more positive and empowering. And so this is kind of just a way to kind of think about it. And I know it says there are 5 types of mechanisms, and I kind of want to keep it at 5, but there's another layer of consideration, I think, that is important, which is values, which is a secondary part of agency because you're trying to move towards your values. And then sort of parts of values are the roles you occupy and how you view your identity. This is a bit tangential, so I'm not going to talk about it too much now, but I thought it was important to mention it. So, a couple more things. The research on a lot of these mental exercises, there's just kind of preliminary or small, and there's not really research for a large-scale regimen involving multiple mental exercises, stringing them together in the attempt to get a sort of attentional fitness. This is a problem. And so it's a problem in terms of interpreting the information we have available to advocate for mental exercise, because a lot of the research is just very short term, and it's just involving one mental exercise, with the exception of meditation, which does track people who meditate over a long period of time in some of the research. There's no thing for, let's say, saying well, is it a better intervention to just meditate or combine meditation with implementation intentions, and then periodically doing certain type of brainstorming techniques, right? There's no research for that type of stuff specifically, and so a lot of this is going to be on inferences. Another point I wanted to make is that placebo effect is big here, because, and I'm not sure it can be removed, and you definitely don't want to remove it, I don't think, but that is, to some extent, a lot of what is going to be useful about mental exercise is going to be a placebo effect, which is a very real effect, and it definitely, makes a difference. A lot of these, there are studies that show the benefit of mental exercise, like beyond a placebo, like the elderly word studies clearly shows the priming effect is having an effect that's not a placebo effect. And so, but part of what the positive effects you're going to get out of mental exercise is just thinking something's going to work. If you think an intervention is going to make it easier for you to eat less, like in the case of the implementation intentions for drinking water, it's probably going to help you eat less, even if it wouldn't actually do anything. But that it actually does something on top of it, that's just gravy. But I think it's important to recognize that placebo is going to play a big part in any sort of structured mental activity, and that it's okay that it plays a big part. Antidepressants, a huge portion of their efficacy, I think it's half, is actually just placebo effect, which doesn't mean antidepressants don't work. It just means that part of how they work is a placebo. Another quarter is you just getting better naturally, and then the other quarter is like the actual effect of the medication. Okay, so to sort of tie all this all together, this sort of dalliance through multiple fields on the topic of mental exercise, it's a proactive approach where you're trying to increase your agency by changing the way that you perceive reality such that more options are going to enter your awareness. Your perceived ability to engage in those options is going to be developed in a way you want, and this sort of thing. And a big part of this is like the psychological literature on affordances and how we perceive reality, and it's a little much to get into right now because it's already over half an hour. But I think I've developed pretty good overview of what I'm talking about here in kind of as short as time as I think I can. If you have any questions, they'd be very much appreciated in the comments, because it's hard for me to know what I've missed or if I've missed anything. And if you have any specific things you want explored or explained in greater depth, that would also be greatly appreciated. And then finally, do all the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, share, take a walk, to probably increase your quality of life, right? In terms of embodiment, walking is very good, and have a good day.